Stop. Listen. Pay attention. Chosen one. This is not noise passing through your day. It is a direct interruption meant to meet you exactly where you are. You are not late to this moment, and you are not being rushed into fear. You are being called into clarity. You have been carrying a quiet weight that others do not see. Fatigue that does not match your effort. Pressure that arrives without explanation. A sense of isolation even when you are not alone. You may have noticed confusion creeping in around simple decisions or a heaviness that lingers after rest. None of this means you are failing. It means something real has been pressing on you, and it has reached a point where it can no longer remain unnamed. You did not break under it. That matters. This message is not here to dramatize what you felt or inflate it into something it was not. It is here to explain why your steadiness during that time was the evidence. You were tested by conditions that usually fragment people, and yet you stayed present. You remained functional. You kept moving without forcing momentum. That is not accidental. There is urgency here, but not panic. Urgency because clarity has a timing window, and this is it. If you move past this without understanding what just concluded, you may mislabel your own resilience as numbness or exhaustion. That would be inaccurate. What you experienced was pressure reaching its limit and failing to dislodge you. You may have wondered why resolution did not come through confrontation or decisive action. Why waiting seemed to do more than effort. Why silence accomplished what intensity could not. Those questions are valid. They are also the doorway to the explanation you are ready to receive. This message is intentional and personal. It is not a broadcast meant to inspire a crowd. It is directed to you because your internal response was the point of observation. You stood unbroken while variables shifted around you. You did not collapse into reaction. You did not harden into defense. You stayed coherent. That steadiness is not something you summoned. It is something you already possessed. What follows will not overwhelm you. It will clarify what just ended, why it could not continue, and why a declaration was made without spectacle. Not to elevate you, but to finalize a process that no longer has leverage over you. Stay with this. You will recognize yourself in what is revealed. This is where uncertainty is removed. This message is not meant to be applied broadly or interpreted symbolically. It is for you because of how you responded when pressure was present, not how you spoke about it, not how you explained it to others, how you held yourself internally when there was no audience and no reinforcement. You are not listening because you are curious. You are listening because something in you recognizes accuracy. There was no surge of emotion when this began. No rush, just a quiet sense of alignment. That response narrows the field. It tells you this is not motivational language or abstract encouragement. It is a precise address. The identity being named here does not require performance. Chosen one is not a title you adopt. It describes a pattern that already operates in you. When conditions tightened, you did not fragment. When expectations pressed in, you did not become reactive. You stayed intact. What happened recently was not theoretical. It involved you directly. The strain you felt was not imagined, and the timing was not random. There was an expectation placed on you to bend to respond out of fatigue to compromise clarity for relief. That expectation failed. Not because you resisted it consciously, but because there was nothing in you for it to attach to. This is the distinction that matters. Many people endure by force. They grit their teeth. They brace. They push through. That is not what you did. You did not mount a defense. You did not escalate effort. You remained regulated. Your nervous system stayed coherent. Your sense of self did not shrink under demand. That kind of stability does not come from struggle. It comes from structure. You were not waiting because you were passive. You were waiting because there was no urgency inside you to prove, fix, or react. That waiting was not indecision. It was alignment holding its ground. And while you waited, what relied on urgency to survive lost traction. This is why the declaration was final. Not dramatic, not public. Final, because the condition that sought movement from you no longer had access. You did not negotiate with it. You outlasted it by remaining whole. The identity being confirmed here is simple. You are someone whose strength operates automatically. You do not need activation to remain unbroken. You are already arranged internally in a way that withstands pressure without friction. This message is for you because you lived it before you understood it. And now understanding can arrive without changing who you are. The symptom you noticed most was not fear or anxiety. It was fatigue, a specific kind. Not the tiredness that follows effort, but the dull, persistent heaviness that lingered even when nothing obvious was wrong. You may have slept and still felt unchanged. You may have reduced activity and still felt pressure sitting quietly in the background. That is the signal. This fatigue was not a flaw in your discipline or a failure of your mindset. It was not burnout in the usual sense. It was the sensation of carrying weight that did not originate from your own actions. And the reason it confused you is because it did not behave like normal exhaustion. It did not improve with motivation, and it did not worsen with challenge. It simply waited. You may have judged yourself for it, wondered why your drive felt muted, or why enthusiasm did not respond the way it used to. That self-judgment was misplaced. What you were experiencing was your system conserving coherence under sustained pressure. It was not shutting down. It was regulating. When pressure builds over time without a clear source, the body and mind do not panic. They simplify. They reduce unnecessary output. They become quieter. That quiet is often mistaken for weakness. In reality, it is a form of intelligence. Your system recognized that reacting would feed instability, so it slowed everything down. This is why the fatigue did not come with emotional collapse. You were not spiraling. You were not losing perspective. You were still thinking clearly, still functioning, still present. The sensation lived more in your body than in your thoughts. That is an important distinction. It means the strain was environmental, not internal. You were in a period of compression, pressure without visible conflict, demand without instruction, anticipation without release. Your system responded by holding steady and reducing excess movement. That is not disengagement. That is containment. Once you see this clearly, confusion lifts. You stop asking what is wrong with you and start recognizing what is happening around you. The fatigue was a signal that something external required urgency to maintain influence, and you were not providing it. By staying slow, steady, and unreactive, you prevented escalation. This is why the symptom faded quietly instead of breaking dramatically. When pressure loses traction, it does not explode. It dissolves. And when it dissolves, the first thing that returns is not excitement, but clarity. You are not behind. You are not depleted. You were in a phase where stability mattered more than speed. Now that the pressure has lifted, your energy will recalibrate naturally without forcing a return. This understanding prepares you for what comes next. Because what you felt was not random, and it did not occur in isolation. It was the surface expression of a larger interaction that remained unseen, structured, and contained. What you moved through was not internal turbulence. It was pressure applied from outside your usual patterns. Subtle, coordinated, timed. Not dramatic enough to be obvious, but persistent enough to test stability. This is why it was difficult to describe while it was happening. There were no clear events to point to, no single confrontation, just a sustained sense of being pressed. This kind of pressure does not announce itself loudly. It shows up as delays that stack without explanation, as conversations that feel slightly off, as decisions that take more effort than they should, as a background demand for reaction. It relies on one thing to work that you become unsettled enough to move prematurely. The timing matters. This pressure arrived after a period of consistency in you, when your routines were established, when your sense of self was not in flux. That is not coincidence. Pressure like this is applied when movement would create instability, not when collapse is guaranteed. The intent is disruption, not destruction. What stands out is not that pressure was present. It is that you remained functional while it was. You did not withdraw from responsibility. You did not abandon clarity. You showed up even if with less enthusiasm. You stayed engaged with life without forcing intensity. That is the confrontation. Quiet, unannounced, resolved without spectacle. There was an expectation that accumulated strain would push you into reaction, that you would overcorrect, that you would explain yourself, defend yourself, or attempt to regain momentum through force. None of that happened. You did not accelerate. You did not retreat. You stayed steady. This is where the pressure lost structure. Pressure without reaction cannot sustain itself. It needs feedback. It needs escalation. It needs a loop. You did not provide one. By remaining regulated, you removed the mechanism it depended on. This was not a test of courage or faith. It was a test of coherence. Could you remain yourself without needing resolution? Could you wait without narrating the wait? Could you let time pass without interpreting it as failure? You answered those questions without consciously trying to. That is why the resolution feels quiet now. No dramatic shift, no sudden relief, just a sense that something has concluded. That conclusion did not come because you confronted anything directly. It came because what was applied to you could not move you. This is what standing unbroken looks like in real life. Not defiance, not intensity. Consistency under pressure. The declaration that followed was not spoken outwardly. It was structural. The condition ended because it reached its limit against your steadiness. And once a limit is reached without result, it does not return in the same form. To understand why the pressure ended, you need to see how it tried to work. Not as a single force, but as a sequence of pressure points layered together. None of them were extreme on their own. That was intentional. The goal was accumulation, not impact. What matters is how you moved through each without losing coherence. The first pressure point was doubt, not the loud, destabilizing kind. The subtle kind that asks quiet questions at inconvenient times. You noticed it when simple decisions took longer than usual. When clarity was present, but confidence felt slightly delayed. This doubt did not challenge your values or direction. It targeted timing. It tried to make you second-guess when to move, not where to go. You did not rush to resolve it. You let uncertainty exist without treating it as a threat. By doing that, doubt had nothing to amplify. It stayed informational instead of becoming corrosive. The second pressure point was emotional flatness, not sadness, not despair. Just a narrowing of emotional range. Things that usually brought satisfaction felt muted. This often triggers people to chase stimulation or create urgency. You did neither. You did not demand that emotion return on your schedule. You allowed neutrality without labeling it as loss. That choice prevented overcompensation. Emotional flatness passed through without becoming numbness because you did not panic about it. The third pressure point was energy drain. This is where many people collapse, not because energy disappears, but because it feels inefficient. You had enough to function, but not enough to feel momentum. That gap tempts people to force productivity or withdraw completely. You chose neither extreme. You maintained essential rhythms. You rested without guilt. You worked without self-punishment. That balance kept your system regulated. The drain did not deepen because you did not fight it. The fourth pressure point was isolation. Not physical separation, but the sense that explaining yourself would take more energy than it was worth. Conversations felt heavier. Social engagement required more filtering. This often leads to withdrawal or oversharing. You did neither. You simplified interaction. You conserved speech. You stayed present without trying to be understood by everyone. That protected your internal clarity. Isolation remained situational instead of becoming identity. The fifth pressure point was delay. This is the most misunderstood one. Delays appeared where progress was expected. Responses took longer, outcomes paused. This kind of delay is designed to provoke urgency, to make you move early just to feel motion again. You resisted that impulse without resisting consciously. You did not interpret delay as denial. You treated it as neutral. By not assigning meaning to the pause, you removed its leverage. Across all 5 pressure points, the pattern is consistent. You did not escalate. You did not dramatize. You did not personalize what was structural. You stayed within yourself. You regulated instead of reacting. That is not passive. That is disciplined presence. What is important here is that none of this required constant awareness. You were not monitoring yourself or analyzing every sensation. Your responses were automatic. That tells you something critical about your internal structure. It is already arranged to absorb pressure without distortion. Pressure systems depend on predictability. They expect certain reactions at certain thresholds. When those reactions do not appear, the system destabilizes. Not violently, quietly. It loses sequence. It cannot progress. You did not win against these pressure points. You made them irrelevant. By staying stable, you denied them the feedback they needed to continue. Each one reached its limit independently, and when combined, they collapsed without announcement. This is why the experience feels hard to explain in hindsight. Nothing dramatic happened, and yet something significant concluded. You remained intact across multiple simultaneous pressures that often dismantle people one layer at a time. That is not luck. It is not coincidence. It is the result of an internal arrangement that does not fracture under accumulation. You did not need to name what was happening for it to end. Understanding this is not about revisiting strain. It is about recognizing capability. What you demonstrated was not endurance through suffering. It was coherence through complexity. And once coherence is observed and confirmed, it changes how everything that follows is understood. Now the review becomes possible. Not while you were inside it, but after it has concluded. Distance brings accuracy. You can look back without distortion and see what actually occurred. What stands out is not a single moment of strength. It is continuity. There was no spike of effort followed by collapse. No dramatic turnaround, just a steady line. You remained yourself across changing conditions. That consistency is the confirmation. When experiences end quietly, the mind often tries to explain them away. It reaches for coincidence, timing, mood, circumstance. Those explanations do not hold here. Too many variables aligned. The pressure arrived with structure. It lingered. It withdrew without escalation. That pattern indicates resolution, not randomness. You did not recover because conditions improved. Conditions improved because your internal coherence did not fracture. That reversal matters. It means stability was the cause, not the result. Notice what did not happen. You did not lose perspective. You did not become reactive toward others. You did not abandon your standards. You did not betray your own pacing. Even when clarity felt delayed, your orientation remained intact. You continued to evaluate calmly. You continued to choose proportionately. You continued to act without urgency. This is how resilience reveals itself. Not as toughness, but as alignment. Your responses matched reality without exaggeration. You did not inflate threats. You did not minimize yourself. You stayed accurate. It is tempting to credit endurance to personality or habit alone. That explanation falls short. Many people with discipline still fracture when pressure accumulates across multiple domains at once. What protected you was not effort. It was coherence. Your thoughts, emotions, and actions remained congruent. They did not split. This is why relief did not arrive as excitement. It arrived as understanding, a sense that something had completed its cycle. That completion was not marked by reward. It was marked by quiet certainty. You may also notice that nothing needs to be reclaimed. No confidence to rebuild. No momentum to manufacture. You are not returning to yourself because you never left. That is confirmation. When review replaces speculation, self-trust strengthens. You no longer ask whether you handled it correctly. You see that you handled it naturally. That realization does not inflate you. It steadies you. What occurred does not need to be repeated for proof. The evidence is already integrated. You know now, without argument, that pressure can reach its limit without you breaking form. That knowledge is not theoretical. It is lived. This is where evaluation becomes closure. Not by summarizing events, but by recognizing the pattern that carried you through them. You did not survive by chance. You remained intact by design. And once that is understood, the way you interpret future strain changes permanently. It helps now to place your experience beside what commonly happens to others. Not to elevate you, but to clarify what was unusual about your response. Most people do not collapse because of one overwhelming event. They collapse under far less. A single delay, a period of uncertainty, a sustained feeling of being unseen. The system reacts quickly. Emotion escalates. Identity wavers. Functionality narrows. You did not do that. Under comparable pressure, many people become erratic. Their focus fractures. They rush decisions to regain a sense of control, or they withdraw entirely, interpreting strain as personal failure. Even capable, disciplined individuals often swing between extremes when pressure lingers without explanation. That swing is common. It is human. What sets your response apart is not intensity or exceptional effort. It is steadiness. You did not need clarity immediately in order to remain present. You did not require reassurance to keep functioning. You did not convert discomfort into urgency. You stayed in proportion to what was actually happening. This is uncommon, not superior. Uncommon. Most people are organized around reaction. When pressure appears, their internal systems mobilize defensively. Yours did not. They remained open, regulated, and responsive rather than reactive. That allowed you to stay functional even when conditions were ambiguous. You did not become emotionally expressive to discharge strain, nor did you suppress it. You allowed sensation to pass through without assigning it authority. That alone places you outside the usual pattern. Many people mistake emotional intensity for engagement. You demonstrated engagement without intensity. This is why your presence did not waver. You continued to show up in ordinary ways. You met obligations. You made decisions. You interacted without dramatizing your internal state. That kind of grounded functioning under pressure is rare even among people who consider themselves resilient. Rarity here does not imply hierarchy. It points to preparation. Some systems are built to withstand accumulation without distortion. Others are not. You discovered which one you are by living through it, not by being told. What matters is not comparison itself, but orientation. You now know that your baseline response to strain is stability, not collapse. That awareness is quiet, but it recalibrates expectation. You no longer assume that pressure equals danger. You recognize it as information. This recognition does not separate you from others. It simply clarifies your design. And clarity, once established, does not need reinforcement to remain true. What becomes clear now is that your strength was never something you turned on. It did not activate in response to pressure. It was already present as a baseline condition. That distinction matters because it explains why there was no internal shift when strain arrived. You did not gear up. You stayed the same. This kind of stability is not reactive. It is structural. It comes from preparation that is not always visible even to you. Experiences layered over time. Self-regulation practiced quietly. An internal order that does not depend on circumstances to hold. You did not need to remind yourself who you were while pressure was present. You did not rehearse affirmations or build narratives to stay upright. Your coherence did not require explanation to function. That tells you that your identity is not situational. It is integrated. Many people confuse strength with intensity. They believe resilience looks like forced drive or constant engagement. Yours looks like consistency. It looks like being the same person in silence as in clarity, the same in delay as in motion. That sameness is not rigidity. It is alignment. You were prepared without knowing you were preparing. Life structured you for this without announcement. You learned to stay with yourself through complexity, to let uncertainty exist without dissolving your center, to remain oriented without needing immediate resolution. There is nothing supernatural being claimed here, no external force stepping in. What held you was internal coherence. Your nervous system, your perception, and your decision-making remained synchronized. That synchronization is maturity. This is why the pressure could not reorganize you. There was nothing loose to rearrange. Your values did not fluctuate. Your sense of self did not inflate or shrink. You did not fragment into roles or reactions. You remained whole. Identity clarification does not give you something new. It removes doubt about what is already operating. You are someone whose default state is regulated presence. You do not need to rise to the occasion because you already inhabit it. This understanding does not demand that you become vigilant or guarded. It invites ease. When you know your baseline holds you, stop scanning for threats. You trust your structure to respond accurately when needed. That trust is quiet. It does not seek validation. It does not need reinforcement. It simply informs how you move forward. And moving forward now does not require effort. It requires integration. Taking what has been clarified and allowing it to settle into how you live, choose, and rest. Now the focus shifts from understanding to integration. Not action in the urgent sense, but orientation. How you carry this awareness into ordinary life without turning it into a project or a performance. The first orientation is rest, not collapse, not withdrawal. Rest as permission. You no longer need to prove that you can endure. Your system has already demonstrated that. Let rest be a recalibration, not a reward. Sleep when your body asks. Slow down without explanation. Rest allows coherence to deepen rather than degrade. The second orientation is discernment. You do not need to respond to every sensation or signal immediately. You have seen that waiting does not weaken you. It clarifies. Before engaging, ask whether movement is required or simply available. Discernment protects you from unnecessary expenditure of energy. The third orientation is boundaries. Not rigid walls, but clean edges. You are allowed to limit exposure to what drains clarity. You are allowed to choose simplicity in conversation environment and commitment. Boundaries are not defenses, they are maintenance. They preserve the internal order you already carry. The fourth orientation is patience. Not passive tolerance, but measured timing. You do not rush resolution because you no longer equate delay with danger. You let processes complete themselves. Patience keeps you aligned with reality rather than anticipation. It prevents premature action that would cost more than it gives. The fifth orientation is focus. Not hyperfocus, not obsession. Focus as selective attention. You place your awareness where it matters and withdraw it where it does not. You have learned that not everything deserves engagement. Focus keeps your energy coherent instead of scattered. The final orientation is balance. You do not scan constantly for pressure. You do not analyze every fluctuation. You live. You participate. You stay open. Awareness does not mean vigilance. It means trust in your internal regulation to signal when attention is actually required. Integration is quiet. It does not announce itself. It shows up as ease in decision-making, as steadiness in routine, as reduced need to explain yourself to yourself or others. You do not need to revisit what ended. You allow it to remain concluded. This prepares closure not by sealing something away, but by letting it settle into memory without charge. You are not changed by what happened. You are clarified. And clarity, once integrated, becomes orientation without effort. You can settle now, not because everything is perfect and not because nothing difficult will ever arise again. You can settle because what needed to be proven has already been demonstrated. You stood unbroken without hardening. You remained yourself without force. That is the seal. Nothing more is being asked of you in this moment. There is no next test to anticipate, no posture to maintain. What concluded did so cleanly. It ended because it reached a boundary it could not cross. That boundary was not resistance. It was coherence. Hold the core realization gently. You do not need to repeat the experience to remember it. You do not need to explain it to validate it. You know now quietly and clearly that pressure does not define you. Your response does. And your response is stable. Let this understanding reassure you rather than elevate you. You are not required to be intense to be effective. You are not required to struggle to be strong. You do not need to announce endurance for it to be real. What carries you is already integrated. If words help anchor awareness, let these rest with you. You remain intact under pressure. You do not rush what does not require urgency. You trust your internal order to hold. Nothing here demands belief. These are recognitions of what has already occurred. If this message aligned with your experience, mark it simply. You may place 777 in the comments or write, "I remember." Not as a signal to others, but as a quiet confirmation to yourself that you recognized truth when it was named. If you choose to stay connected, subscribe naturally. Not out of obligation, but because clarity builds best through continuity. The next message will not contradict this one. It will deepen it. There is no dramatic ending needed, no surge, no declaration beyond what has already been finalized. You move forward the same way you stood through pressure. Calm, present, whole. This is not the beginning of something louder. It is the confirmation of something stable, and that stability remains with you.